Imagine you've spent your whole life and your whole fortune building temples to a god, hundreds of them. And one day, a ragged stranger from a faraway country walks into your throne room, and you ask him, "For all of this, how much good have I earned?" And he looks at you and says, "None, nothing at all." Then he turns around, walks down to the river, steps onto a single reed floating on the water, and crosses to the other side. He then finds a mountain cave, sits down facing the wall, and doesn't say a word to anyone for 9 years. Everyone thought he'd lost his mind. He was carrying the one thing all those temples were missing. Let me tell you this story. There's a famous version of how Buddhism reached China. An emperor's dream of a golden man, a monk arriving on a white horse, a wagon piled with scriptures hauled in from India. That's the body of it. The books, the temples, the institution. This is the story of how the soul of Buddhism came to China. It's about 400 years later now, early 6th century. Buddhism is no longer the strange foreign thing the Taoists complained about. It's everywhere. And nowhere is it bigger than in the south of China, under an emperor named Liang Di. Now, you have to understand what kind of man this emperor was. He was the most devout Buddhist ruler China had ever seen. He gave up meat. He gave up wine. They say he sometimes wore plain cotton instead of silk. And he spent a fortune, an emperor's fortune, building temples, funding monasteries, paying for monks to be ordained by the thousand. He copied out scriptures with his own hand. If there was ever a man building himself a stairway to heaven brick by brick, it was him. And then, one day, a monk arrived from India. His name was Dámó. We know him as Dámó or Bodhidharma. Now, the tradition says he was the third son of a South Indian king, a prince who walked away from the throne to become a monk, and then traveled for 3 years to reach China. He showed up ragged, blue-eyed, fierce, foreign. And the emperor, hearing that a great teacher had come from the homeland of the Buddha himself, summoned him to the court. Now, picture this meeting. The most powerful Buddhist on earth sitting across from a barefoot foreigner. And the emperor asks the question he's been waiting his whole life to ask. He lists out all of it. The temples, the monasteries, the copied scriptures, the monks he's ordained. And he says, "How much merit have I earned?" In Chinese, the word is 功德, merit. Think of it like a spiritual bank account. Every good deed, a deposit, building toward a better life, a better rebirth, heaven itself. The emperor had been making deposits for decades. He expected the monk to tell him his account was overflowing. Bodhidharma looked at him and said, "None whatsoever." Silence in the hall. Now, the emperor, stunned, maybe even a little angry, tries again. Then, what is the highest, holiest truth of all this teaching? And the Bodhidharma says, vast emptiness, nothing holy. Now, the emperor is a little lost, to say the least. Nothing holy. He spent his whole life on the holy. He asks the last question almost as a challenge. Then, who are you? Who is this man standing in front of me? And the Bodhidharma says, "I don't know." And he turns, and he walks out of the throne room of the most powerful man in southern China. The emperor didn't get it. How could he? He spent his life treating the sacred like something you can earn, something you can buy by the cartload, something you can stack up like temples on a hillside. And this strange monk had just told him to his face that the thing he was chasing couldn't be bought, couldn't be counted, and couldn't be built. You could only wake up to it. The emperor wasn't ready to hear that. So Bodhidharma went looking for someone who was. He walked north, all the way to the great Changjiang, the Yangtze River. And here, the tradition gives us one of the most painted images in all of Chinese art. He didn't wait for a boat. He picked up a single reed from the riverbank, set it on the water, stepped onto it, and crossed the river standing on a blade of grass. On the far side, he climbed a mountain called Songshan, Mount Song in the north. And near a temple there, a temple the world would later know as Shaolin Si, the Shaolin Temple, he found a cave. And then he did the strangest thing anyone there had ever seen. He sat down, he turned to face the bare stone wall of that cave, and he stopped speaking. A day, a week, a season. The monks at the temple watched this foreigner sit and stare at a wall and say nothing, and they didn't know what to make of him. A year went by, then another. The tradition has a line about it. For 9 years he remained, and no one knew him. 9 years, facing a wall. They have a name for what he was doing. 闭关, wallgazing. And it sounds like nothing. It sounds like a crazy man wasting his life. But this was the whole teaching, hiding in plain sight. Everything that emperor cared about, the temples, the relics, the scriptures, the merit, all of it was out there, pointed outward. The monk had turned the other way. He turned to face the one thing nobody wants to sit alone with, his own mind. No book, no ritual, no priest in between, just a man and a wall and whatever came up. They say that one night, deep in meditation, Bodhidharma caught himself falling asleep, and it made him so furious at his own weakness that he cut off his eyelids so his eyes could never close again. And where his eyelids fell to the ground, the first tea plant grew, which is why, to this day, monks drink tea to stay awake when they meditate. The most ordinary thing in the world, a cup of tea, and the tradition says it grew out of one man's refusal to look away. They say, too, that 9 years of sitting perfectly still withered his arms and his legs away to nothing. And if you've ever seen one of those round red Japanese dolls, the ones with the big eyes staring and no arms and no legs, the ones that wobble and always tip back upright no matter how you knock them over, that doll is him. The Japanese call it Daruma, their name for Dharma, for Bodhidharma. There's a saying that goes with it. Fall down 7 times, stand up 8. That's him. That's 9 years against a wall, turned into a children's toy. So that's the man, a foreigner who told an emperor his life's work was worth nothing, crossed a river on a reed, and then sat down and stared at a wall until he became a legend. And into year 9, a visitor came up the mountain. He was a Chinese scholar, a learned man named Shen Guang. Decades of study behind him, Confucius, the Taoist, the Buddhist sutras, all of it. He had read everything, and he had found that none of it, not one word of all those books, had given him what he actually wanted, which was a mind at peace. He heard there was a strange master sitting in a cave on Mount Song, so he climbed up. He stood behind that motionless monk, and he asked to be taught. Bodhidharma didn't answer, didn't turn around, didn't move. So Shen Guang stayed. Night came, and with the night came the snow. It came down over the mountain, over the temple, over the mouth of the cave where the scholar stood waiting. He didn't leave. The snow reached his ankles. He didn't move. It reached his knees. He stood there through the whole black freezing night, and by the gray of the next morning, the snow had risen to his waist, and he was still standing, still waiting, behind a man who would not turn around. Finally, Bodhidharma spoke. Without turning, he said, "What do you want?" standing out there in the snow. And the scholar wept, and he begged him, "Open the gate, teach me the way, give me what all my books could not." And Bodhidharma said the cruelest thing. He said, "The highest truth of the Buddhas is not won by men with a little patience and a little virtue, by the comfortable and the easy. Why should someone like you receive it?" He was telling him to go home. And here is the moment the whole story turns on. If you're still here, still leaning in, why are you not subscribed? Hit it. I tell stories like this every week. The scholar reached down to his side and drew a blade. And to prove that his whole heart was in it, that he wasn't a man with a little patience, that there was nothing he would hold back on, he cut off his own left arm and he laid it down in the snow in front of the wall. And that is when Bodhidharma finally turned around. He looked at this bleeding man in the snow, and something in him recognized something in the other. He gave him a new name. From that morning on, the scholar, Shen Guang, would be called Huike, able to be wise, and he became Bodhidharma's student. Now, you'd think after a price like that, the teaching would be some enormous secret, a scripture, a spell, the hidden name of God. Here is the entire thing, 4 lines, listen. Huike, still bleeding, asks him, "Master, my mind is not at peace. I beg you, pacify it for me." And Bodhidharma says, "Bring me your mind, and I will pacify it for you." Then there's a long silence, because Huike actually does it. He goes looking, turns inward, hunts through himself for this anxious, churning mind he's carried his whole life, the one all his books couldn't quiet, and he can't find it. He can't lay his hands on it. It has no shape, no place, nothing to grab. And he says, "I have searched for my mind, and I cannot find it anywhere." And Bodhidharma says, "There, I have pacified your mind." That's it. That's the whole thing. The mind that had tormented this man for 40 years, the one he'd buried under a mountain of study, the one he gave his arm to have fixed, Bodhidharma never fixed it. He just turned Huike around to look at it directly. And when Huike looked, really looked, there was nothing there to fix. The suffering didn't have an owner. The moment he stopped running from it and turned to face it, the way the master had been facing that wall for 9 years, it let go of him. No scripture said it. No relic glowed. No fire was lit. No temple raised. One man turned around, and another man understood. Passed straight from one mind to one mind, with almost no words at all. The tradition has a phrase for this. They call it 教外别传, a transmission outside the scriptures, a truth too alive to be written down. This is the seed of Chan, what the Japanese would later call Zen. Everything that came after, every Zen master, every silent meditation hall, every raked stone garden, every cup of tea, every Shaolin monk, all of it traces back through Huike's severed arm to that morning in the snow. Bodhidharma was the first patriarch. Huike, the man who gave his arm, became the second. And the thing they passed between them in that cave was the one thing 400 years of scriptures and an emperor's 1,000 temples had never quite managed to hold. If you know someone whose mind just won't quiet down, someone who's been searching everywhere outside themselves for a little peace, share this video with them. And if this one got to you, here's another monk who turned to face the thing most men would run from. Picture a wandering priest alone in the dark, lying down to sleep on the most haunted road in all of Japan. Click the thumbnail on your screen right now and watch it, and I'll see you in the next story.